There are 5 questions any speaker should ask when they are preparing to speak in public. Those 5 questions are: to whom am I speaking? What is my goal in relation to my audience? What resources do I need to achieve my goal? How do I present those resources clearly? And how do I present those resources memorably? In this video tutorial, we're going to talk about the first and part of the second question proposed. To whom am I speaking? And what is my goal in relation to my audience? When we ask, to whom am I speaking, we're engaged in a process known as audience analysis and also contextual analysis. When we look at audience analysis, we're looking at several questions. One of those questions is demography, or the aspects of demographics. Demographics can include a cultural background of the audience. Is the audience predominantly one ethnicity, or do they belong to multiple ethnicities? What difference does that make in light of your topic? If you're talking about something like how computers work, or if you're demonstrating a particular software, it might not matter because the technology doesn't change depending on what ethnicity you're talking about. However, if you're talking about social policy, the views and the ways in which cultural backgrounds influence the audience will be significant. A second question is age. What is the predominant age of the members of your audience, and how might that affect the way you talk to them, assumptions you make about what they do know and what they don't know? What are their values? How do you know that? Well, you talk to the people that have organized the presentation. Maybe this is an organization or a business that has set values. Maybe you know this regionally, but what do they think is important? What do they find to be morally significant, and what do they perhaps not care as strongly about? And then finally, knowledge. What do they know? What do they not know? What do they need to know in light of your topic? So you're doing some analysis of the audience, their cultural background, their age, their values, and their knowledge. And based on that understanding that you develop, you make some assumptions about what you should do to change the speech, not so that it compromises your message, but so that it meets your audience where they are. Something else I find helpful is to think about context. And in Think Communication by Wynn and Engelberg, they say that context has really 4 ways to view this, or 4 aspects of context. The first is psychosocial. This has to do with the relationship between you as the speaker and the audience members with themselves. It is the psychological and social psychological aspects of the context. Who are they to you? Who are they to each other? Another way to understand context is logistical. This has to do with time and space that you're speaking in. If you're speaking in a classroom at, say, at 7 o'clock in the morning, that's a really early time for an audience to be awake and to be thinking. And a classroom presents its own special logistical concerns, both resources that might be available. It's designed for presentational communication, but also some challenges. It can feel industrial, or it can feel institutional. So you're thinking about all the logistical concerns. This is also when you start thinking about, do you need a microphone? Will you have a podium? What kind of projection technology do you have? All of the physical, tangible, and temporal, that is time-based things that go into that context, you need to think about in this view of contextual analysis. A third question then is, a third aspect of context is the interactional context. We have different ways that we communicate. We communicate interpersonally. That's one person having a conversation with another person. It's a relationship building form of communication. Small group communication. Then presentational communication. We're talking even about mass communication. But in terms of a public speaking situation, interactional context has to do with how much dialogue are they going to be engaged in. Is this a kind of presentation where they're going to be able to ask you questions while you're speaking? Are you going to be able to ask them questions while you're speaking? Are they going to be able to interact with you? And can you get them to interact with each other? Can you have them turn to their neighbor and engage in some interpersonal communication as a way of reinforcing or entering into the message? Can you group them into small groups and have them do a small group discussion or activity in the midst of your presentation? What's the capacity of the context to give you interaction? And then fourth aspect of communication context that Wynn and Engelberg suggest that we look at is the mediated context. What is the nature of media in that presentation? I've seen some presentations where while the speaker was speaking, the Twitter feed for the event was running over their head on a screen. Not my favorite thing to do. Mediated context might also mean the fact that you've got a presentation software, or that you're encouraging people to ask questions via Twitter, or being some form of media-related communication. Is it going out over Facebook Live or being pushed through YouTube? It's all of the questions about the media, and because of social media, that becomes much more accessible to everyone. What impact does that have on your presentation? So we're going to look at a few scenarios for communication analysis, and I want you, as we do this, I'd like you to think about these 8 elements of both context and an audience. The cultural background, the age, the values, the knowledge, the psychosocial context, logistical context, interactional context, and mediated context. Right. The first of these is the following. You are a relationships consultant with advanced degrees in psychology. The Department of Transportation has hired you to provide sensitivity training to a group of engineers. Your audience consists of 25 males and 10 females. They each hold positions of responsibility and leadership in the department. The seminar typically requires 10 hours. They have scheduled this as a Friday evening, all-day Saturday session. Attendance is required. So for this question, some things to think about. I want you to think about all 8 of those aspects of communication and audience analysis, context and audience analysis. But one thing that stands out is how many men and how many women are in this group. If you said 25 males and 10 females, you're correct. So think about context. To which aspect of context does gender belong? If you said psychosocial, again, you're correct. So how might this gender balance affect your speech? Given that you're talking about sensitivity training, the gender balance probably matters a great deal. Some questions. How long is this presentation? You remember that it said 10 hours. That's a really long presentation. So to which aspect of communication, the context, does length of time belong? Psychosocial? It's not really about relationships. Logistical? Is it a time-based concern? Is it a space thing? It's more time, so it's logistical. Interactional? It could impact interactional. With that level of time you have, and given the size of the audience, you have time to have them think in small group settings, in interpersonal settings. They can talk about things together. What about the mediated context? It might. You certainly would want to use projection technology, and that's a form of mediated communication. Probably wouldn't do too much with social media, although sensitivity and social media do go hand in hand, so that might impact what you're doing. What difference might this make in your speech? We've talked about some of that. So as you're going through these scenarios, this is what you want to think about. Here's a second scenario. You have the opportunity to speak at the annual Rotary Club Christmas banquet. I have found in the past people don't always know what Rotary clubs are. They are civic organizations that are usually business people and their families join together to do good works. They're similar to a Kiwanis Club or a Key Club. There are others. Ambucks is a similar kind of organization. And so there are a number of these organizations in American culture. They just do good things, and they usually get together several times, sometimes even once a week, but certainly several times a year, for both interaction purposes and also to do things in the community that make a difference. As a leading businesswoman in the town of Farmers Branch, you have been instrumental in the development of several charitable organizations. You primarily emphasize work that encourages independence. You started the Farmer Branch Literacy Council and the Second Chance Society, which offers occupational training. You have 20 minutes to speak. The speech occurs after a reception and dinner at one of the nicer restaurants in town. So as you think about this scenario, where does this speech take place? That's right, it takes place in a restaurant. To which aspect of context does the location belong? Psychosocial, logistical, interactional, or mediated? That's right, it's logistical. As a speaker, what do you need to do to adjust to location? Speaking in a restaurant is a very particular kind of context. There are wait staff coming in and out, taking plates and removing items, bringing coffee and drinks, maybe even serving dessert while you speak. I saw that recently. It's designed for interpersonal communication, not necessarily for presentational communication. So some things you'd want to think about is, do you need a microphone? Yeah, you probably do, even if you think you're loud enough. You may want to ask the wait staff to wait until after you're done speaking to try to clear the tables. Just leave things as they are once you start speaking and leave them that way until you are done. This is a particular kind of context. You want to think about the other aspects though too. What about the psychosocial context here? What about the interactional context and the mediated context? What about the audience values, demographics, their age, their ethnicity? How does all of that impact what you're doing in this speech? Scenario number 3. Your advertising team has selected you to present your ideas for an ad campaign to the executives of Procter & Gamble. You have developed a completely new advertising scheme for their major toothpaste and tooth care products. Your presentation will incorporate video, computer-generated graphics, and handouts. You have the disadvantage of speaking at a conference room at Procter & Gamble. This presentation could be the capstone of your career. So think about those 8 aspects that we talked about. The 4 we talked about with audience analysis, the audience cultural background, their age, their values, the things that they find important, and think about the forms of context. There are social psychological dynamics here. You're a vendor, you're trying to persuade them. The logistical context, it's in their place, not yours. Think about the context of their level of interaction with each other and with you, likely to be Q&A that they're going to drive rather than that you're going to drive. And think about the mediated context, the technology impact. Your company has decided to switch insurance companies. The new company offers substantially better services. However, the cost for employees to add additional family members to policy has increased. As Special Services Coordinator, you must explain the changes of the new insurance coverage. During a given week, the company employees can attend one of 5 noontime meetings. They'll be served lunch while you explain the new service. Most of the employees have a status lower than your own. None of the people attending the meeting have the power to fire you. However, this is the 3rd time in 7 years that your company has switched insurance companies. You begin to see there are lots of things going on here. A different kind of logistical context, a social psychological dynamic that's at play, an audience that might be resistant but also might be encouraged by the content of your speech. A lot of things to think about and talk about. So as you think about it, think about those 8 aspects. And then finally, a 5th grade teacher has called you to come and speak to the 5th graders at Oscar Hinger Elementary School about being active in their community as volunteers. You'll be speaking to about 200 students in the Oscar Hinger cafeteria at 1:30 p.m. Mr. Bingham, the school's principal, has allowed 30 minutes for you to speak. After you speak, Most of the classes will hit the playground for recess. Again, a lot going on here in terms of their demographics. They're fifth graders. They're about 10, 11 years old. They have certain values at that age. They do believe in volunteering by and large, and so they want to get active and excited about this. But logistically, you're probably in the worst possible context to speak. School cafeterias are absolutely not designed for presentation. This is after lunch, so they've got food sitting on their stomachs. They know what's coming next, and so they're excited about that. So a lot to overcome in this presentation. So as you think about these scenarios, you think about these different aspects of both the audience and the context to help you get a sense of what you need to be doing to adjust as the speaker. The second question then is, what's my goal in relation to my audience? And this question gets answered with two specific statements, the specific purpose and the thesis statement. I introduce it here because of the way I want to use the scenarios that we just talked about. In preparing for a specific purpose, you're writing out what your goal is or what your there is for the speech. And you think about what are the 5 general purposes for giving a speech. So specific purpose going to be applied to a specific situation, but these are general purposes for giving a speech. There are 5 general purposes. One is to inform. When you inform someone, you're trying to help them understand the topic. They don't need to be able to apply it, they just need to be able to understand what you're talking about. Instructional communication is similar to informative communication, though instructional communication really does have the impact of trying to get people to be able to apply information that you are providing to them. In persuasive communication, your goal is to persuade, that is to change an attitude, belief, behavior, or policy. And inspiring, you assume that the audience already believes in what you're talking about, and you're trying to motivate them to renew their inspiration, their commitment to that shared goal. And then finally, to entertain is to provide some diversion. So of these purposes, we looked at these 5 scenarios. Which of these 5 scenarios was really designed to inform? Keep in mind that you really want to focus on one. The presentation scenario we looked at, where you were the services coordinator for your work and you were talking about insurance, really is an informative speech. You're not necessarily trying to change their minds. You might hope they like it, but they're not really going to change their minds. Your goal here is to inform them about the changes. And in terms of instructional communication, which of the 5 scenarios really dealt with instruction? The first scenario really dealt with instruction, the place where you are the psychologist trying to teach sensitivity training, implied there that it's instructional. In terms of persuasive speaking, which of those 5 was persuasive? The Procter & Gamble presentation where you're trying to sell them on a new ad campaign. These last 2 may be a little difficult. You might think that your job in the 5th grade is to entertain and your job with a Christmas banquet is to inspire. You probably could make a case going either way. But in terms of the way I structure this, I would say that the 5th graders are meant to be inspired. They already believe in the value of volunteering. You're just trying to get them to renew that commitment. Afternoon speeches are by definition speeches meant to entertain, and so that's the genre that you're in. So keeping those in mind, we'll talk a little bit in the next video about what you do with this and how you produce a specific purpose, but for now it's enough to simply introduce these 5 general topics and look at them in light of the persuasive or the scenarios that I